You and I have talked a lot about this, and we've talked in front of people about this, just sort of a sense of being an athletic director in today's environment, especially here, with such a unique atmosphere here, so many sports, and obviously we're known for our championship basketball team, but sort of operating in whatever you want to call it, big-time college athletics, medium-sized college athletics. In this environment, how do you operate as an athletic director at a school like this?
Yeah, it's, difficult, but, as we heard our last speaker talk about, if, you're not connected to your passion, you really don't have a chance. And fortunately, for whatever reason, I find being on a college campus and impacting the lives of 18 to, 22-year-old men and women, I get passionate about it. I enjoy it. The opportunity to impact a comprehensive collegiate experience, not just on the athletic side, but from an overall community perspective, is unique. And to build a connection that hopefully is going to last the rest of their lives, so that for the next 60 or 70 years they love coming back and being a part of this, whatever's going on at the university, is really, really special. And that's the number one objective in our department, is to make sure that we're graduating complete student athletes, that our kids touch every corner of campus. And I think based on Val's leadership and the members of our conference, we're aligned in that mission. A lot of our member institutions share that same vision, which makes it a great place to come to work. On the flip side of that, the challenges that we face, pick up the newspaper, turn on anybody following college athletics, it's inherently risky, and we're dealing with risk all the time, and exposure on major topics that seem to rear their head every semester. We're dealing with a new topic, the FBI probe to college admissions to right on down the line. Couple that with, in most cases, college athletics is a broken financial model, a very broken financial model. When you have one program like us in men's basketball that really, at the end of the day, generates a little bit of revenue, but then you have 23 sports that cost a whole bunch of money to run, especially, FCS football, which brings its own benefit to produce guys like this, but financially, it's hard. It's hard to do. So there are challenges. Fortunately, again, we've figured out the right algorithm or recipe here at Villanova to make it work. But those challenges are the ones we're faced with every day. How do we educate our student athletes? How do we mitigate risk? And how do we survive in a broken financial model? So we're sort of countering that against this unbelievable experience that's unique to anything in the world, right? College athletics doesn't happen anywhere else but here. And I know I take great pride in that.
Yeah, a quick follow-up, because you mentioned FCS football, and what a driver is football in this environment. And of course, the Big East emanated the new Big East, yeah. Sort of leaving some of the big-time football behind. Mm-hmm. But I've heard you talk about statistics in football compared to, again, I keep saying it, 2 out of 3 national championships in the last 3 years here. Financially, how's that compare to even average football programs?
Yeah, I think if you pay attention, and Val can speak to this much more intelligently than I can, but if you look at what they call the Power 5 or the Autonomy 5, whatever you want to call that, we don't really look at it that way, the other 5. Yeah. The economics are completely different. These television deals put them in a separate category, all based on big-time football. And not to say that we're not competitive on that landscape, but that gap between sort of the haves that have major FBS football and the have-nots that don't financially, it poses challenges. And for us at Villanova, our financial model, there's nobody else we can compare it to. And you have flagship blue blood basketball in the premier basketball conference in America, and you combine that with a fully funded FCS football program, those two things don't exist anywhere else. So our budget model is difficult that way. And if we were make decisions strictly on budget, we might reconfigure that, but we don't, because there's tremendous value. Brian is a perfect example of a program that's been around 100+ years, has been a consistent top 25 caliber program, and our graduation rates, our overall success, and the type of men that come out of that program, we're incredibly proud of, and that's why we invest in it, and that's why, you know, we built the Tally Center, and we're in the premier conference of the FCS that produces more NFL talent than any other FCS conference. And then we also have a tremendous responsibility. Again, Brian can speak to this. When you think, you know, 2 out of every 3 African-American males on our campus are student athletes, and the majority of which are tied to our football roster, and to watch what those men do with their lives after coming out of this football program, it's hard to put a price tag on that. So there's tremendous value in that.
That's great. And Val, we talked about this conference that you lead, where it is a basketball conference. And I think in any business, sports or otherwise, you want to stand for something. The Big East is something that stands for premier basketball, quality leadership. Talk about the conference from that perspective.
Well, happy to do that, Andrew. And first, I want to thank you for allowing me to be here today, and to see this great turnout here is fantastic. And I want to commend Mark for the amazing job that he does here at Villanova. He's a great leader. You're lucky to have him. You know, it has been, to answer your question, it's been an honor for me now 6 years to represent this group of schools. I think back in 2013 when the old Big East was disintegrating, to pick up on some of Mark's comments here, disintegrating because schools were trying to find greener pastures in the sport of football. Most of the schools that left the Big East left for football reasons, and specifically to the Atlantic Coast Conference, which was trying to build itself as a football power and has. And I think 6 years ago, there was really a lot of uncertainty about what the future would hold for a group of schools who wanted to go back to their basketball roots. This conference, interestingly, we're celebrating our 40th birthday in May. The conference was founded in 1979 as a basketball-focused conference for schools that at that time were independent and wanted a better way to get into the NCAA postseason. And they knew they needed to be in a conference arrangement in order to do that. So they went off on their own, formed the Big East Conference in 1979. The schools were principally in the Northeast, many of them private schools, many of them Catholic schools. And that is itself a form of connective tissue, because with that private Catholic school sort of template, our schools, in addition to this basketball interest, do have a value set, and Mark spoke so eloquently about some of those values. You know, the priority of academics, the development of the whole person, something that all of our presidents talk about, and then, of course, you know, in the case of our schools, this focus on a service-oriented mission. And in fact, that's worked into a lot of the programming that student athletes here at Villanova and elsewhere do, because they're out in the community, they're learning what it means to help people and so on, developing important skills that way. So that three-legged stool, if you will, of sort of academics, athletic excellence focused in basketball, and then the service piece, I think, would be, you know, that's the answer to your question, Andrew, sort of what the Big East stands for now. You know, I will say it's been very interesting, picking up on another Mark's comments. As conferences go, we're really a tweener. I mean, the NCAA, for those of you who aren't sort of fully briefed on the whole sort of big thing that the NCAA is, it's 1,100 schools split up in 3 divisions. The bulk of the schools are in Division 2 and 3. So that's 700 or 800 schools, and then D1, which the Big East and our schools are part of, is 350 schools. So that's massive. I came out of pro basketball. We had only 24 teams in the NBA when I was working at the NBA. And now you got 350 schools in D1 alone. So it's sort of a massive structure here. And, you know, and it really is divided out by the schools that play high-level football, the schools that play the next level of football, and then the schools that don't have football that their conferences sponsor, and that's the Big East now. So among those group of conferences, we really do stand apart, because we are playing at a very high level in basketball. I mean, you know, this was a down year for the Big East in basketball. We still got 4 teams into the NCAA tournament. And that was largely because we had, you know, a lot of our players graduate. Villanova's got, I think, 100% graduation rate among your men's basketball team, which is incredible. We had players who we didn't think were going to go into the NBA last year.
Yeah, I was here.
Including here. And that happened elsewhere, where we just lost some really great upperclassmen, and so this was a year where the Big East was very young. So I think next year, for those of you who care about the fortunes of the Big East in basketball, we're going to be back, I think in a very big way, including here. And so that's exciting to our presidents because athletics is a front porch. You hear that, all the time. It is a way for people to get to know your school. There's just very few ways that schools can promote themselves and what they stand for and kind of their values that's in a way that sports offers in our country. It's very unique. Other countries don't have college sports like we have them here. We have them here. They're unique. We have our issues. We know it. It's very complex to do what we do, but it's also very unique in a good way that we have these programs that develop people, but also give universities an incredible opportunity to engage students, to engage alums. Nova Nation comes out in full force for this, and it's incredible to engage communities and to make known all the good works they do outside of sports. So, again, it's an honor for me to be part of this, and I just think on behalf of the Big East, we have a lot of exciting times ahead.
Well said, Brian. A couple of people ask me, can we clap for Brian? Because he's, yeah. I will say this, perhaps maybe our most celebrated, certainly on the football side, athlete out there. Every time I ask, Brian's like, just tell me when to show up. Tell me when to be there. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken.
And Brian, you've seen it from all sides coming up as an athlete in that football environment that Mark and Val just talked about here, and now you're seeing what's happened in college sports. Would like to get your thoughts on football, being a player. Is it what you think you thought would evolve when you were an athlete here? It's obviously changed, and it's becoming, in some ways, a lot of professional aspects, especially what Mark talked about with the Power Five. So looking at the football landscape in the NCAA, both in places like this and in those power conferences, what's your take?
Yeah, well certainly thank you guys for the warm applause. I think Val and Mark certainly probably deserve much more applause than I do. But, and thank you for putting this all together, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be back here on campus. Every time I come back, there's new buildings up, and it's parking lots, buildings, and more students. So that's a great thing. But
you help pay for them, right?
I am. I feel like, I'm paying for all of it, actually. The landscape of football, and really, I kind of put it together. It's become football, basketball, the NCAA has become big business, and it's about making money. And I think that, I think it's a good thing. I think the schools are getting more and more money. I think that, the programs, being able to support more programs, just not the football and the basketball program, I think that's very, very important. You can support the women's field hockey and the women's lacrosse and the men's swim team. I think that's just as important. When you have some of these TV contracts, you're able to put money in different places that prior to that, you just weren't able to put it. And, you guys, Val and Mark, you guys are at the forefront of trying to figure out how to make all the money fit and make sure that it all works. And I think it's a great thing. The business is involved with some of the sports. I think it's a great thing. I also think part of the process probably should be some of our players should understand it, and we can get our players, and I'm sure you guys are doing that, getting our players involved in the business side of it as well. As we know them as players, we know them as professional students, but they should also understand the business side too. And then with that being said, and I'm not sure where you guys are at on this, but there's a financial responsibility too. And I remember, I was reminded this morning when I was playing football here, they were selling number 20 jerseys with Westbrook on the back. And even though they might not have sold as many as Tim Tebow, who's probably the number one college jersey ever, there was a couple of them. And,
Did you notice that while you were here, and did you think about that?
Well, I think part of my evolution as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, is understanding things. I was so focused on playing the game that the business side to me wasn't as important. It just wasn't at the forefront of my mind. I think our athletes now, you see them much more business conscious. One of the investments I'm part of is 76 Capital. We were a venture capital group, and we have an athlete venture group, and we have a lot of athletes involved with that because athletes want to be a part of the business now. They don't want to just be forced to play football or basketball or baseball and only worry about that. You know, for a long time here, and we kind of heard it with LeBron, it was shut up and dribble, don't do anything else. And I think those days are over. You know, you have athletes doing a lot of different things, and so the business side of it wasn't as prevalent when I was in school. And of course, being at a smaller school, at a Division I AA school at the time, the business side of it wasn't our number one focus. But now you have guys that are big brands, Zion Williamson, big brands, Tim Tebow, obviously early on, big brand, and there's a business element to it. And it's huge, and I think in a way we have to figure it out, and Val and Mark can try to figure that out, the equations, much better than I can, but somehow that we have to be able to allow the athlete not only to learn about the business and be educated on the business, but also reap some of the rewards that their name and their likeness is, the income and the revenue that they're producing. I think that'd be a big part of the NCAA taking the next step. And it'd probably be a long process, and I know it, at the end of the day, for some schools it's not going to be fair, right, but we have to figure that out, and I think that's the next progression for what's going to happen in the NCAA.
Yeah, and I think the education thing is really happening. Just so people know, Coach Wright now brings his recruits not only around campus, but through here to meet me and our staff, because we're in sports law, we're in sports business, and hopefully we can be a resource. So that's starting now with his recruiting classes. Those are the kind of things that are happening that are so positive, and learning about the business going forward. Now, Mark, in this environment, you mentioned a couple things that are obviously not great topics, but FBI scandal, all the news that's so negative about college athletics, and it's turning into big business, and players should be able to leave, and they're making so much money, and Brian talked about the jerseys. How do you see that in your environment? And you're sort of hearing it from all sides, but you're just trying to maintain the best program you have here. When something like that happens, an FBI scandal, what's your plan of action when that happens?
Yeah, I think transparency is a big word that we harp on, that we want to feel good about everything that we're doing, knowing that if something goes wrong in today's day and age, it's going to be brought to light.
Right.
I think that's more and more true every day, and it gets brought to light like that. And all of a sudden you're adjusting. And you don't know where it's coming from or what the next topic's going to be. I tell our student athletes, it's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. As soon as you finish one side, you got to come back and paint the other side. So we're constantly trying to proactively educate our kids to avoid those types of situations. Obviously the basics, you hire really good people that make good decisions, right? And whatever controversy we face, I think the first two questions as an athletic director that I'm going to be asked is, what did you know and what did you do? And I better be able to answer those really clearly on any given topic. And sometimes I don't know. This admission scandal that kind of came out of left field for me as a guy that worked at USC for 10 years, no idea. No idea. And I worked with a lot of those people, and it was happening, and bad people are going to find a way to do bad things. I'll leave that at that. But you just got to constantly be vigilant. I think just in the time that I've been here at Villanova, we've, and Val would attest to this, we've gone from, transfer policy being at the sort of the big focus. Then all of a sudden the FBI probe hit. And then, pay for play is a constant undercurrent that we talk about. Now it's, admissions scandal. So all these different topics. I'd love, sports betting, marijuana, the legalization of marijuana. How are we going to handle that? So some pretty big topics that we've been very, very fortunate, I think, based on the culture of Villanova and the type of people that have been around, not only the athletic department, but this community for a long time. We've made really good decisions. I think because our athletic department and the coaches, they're aligned with the mission of the university. Do we always get it right? No. Are we going to be perfect? No. The one thing we can't be is naive to think it can't happen here. That's another thing that I've been stressing. I go back again to my USC days, and the Reggie Bush decision and that major case, USC is still recovering from 10 or 11 years later, and that was based on one student athlete's stepfather making a really poor decision 2.5 hours away from campus, and they're recovering from that. So it can happen here. We just want to try and be as vigilant as possible.
Val, when you see these scandals, when you see Power 5 conferences doing, paying football coaches $12 million a year, doing $300 million deals a year on television, do you have a sense of where is this model sustainable on a general sense for the big time Power 5 conferences, and where do you fit? Do you ask yourself those kind of things?
Well, sure. Mark has things to keep him up at night, and, speaking for the conference, it's just sort of very interesting because, there's things Mark has to deal with on campus that he and only he and his coaches and the folks here deal with. We have a different role, and the NCAA has a different role still,
right, in
terms of how conference sports get managed. So, when these things sort of hit, then, the list that Mark ticked off, what I try to do, is I try to keep our board updated. So I think Mark knows this. Every time we have a board meeting, we sort of go through conference business and how we're going to do in men's basketball this year, and, Big East tournament, how ticket sales are going, and sort of things that are very specific to the Big East. But I also make it a point to get in front of our board, Father Peter and his colleagues, the issues of the day in college sports. Because one, I want them to know, I think we have a group of presidents in the Big East that are very dialed in. They have big jobs. I don't even know how they do it. They have so much they have to worry about on campus. But they're very tuned in, I think, to the issues of the day, and in particular, the issues as they bear on what it means for the Big East. So I try to get that in front of them. I'll bring in experts to the meeting. We've had many guest speakers who will come in because I don't think I know everything. I know my limitations on some of the subject matter here. So I'll bring in lawyers if we have to talk about sports betting. For example, we're talking about diversity and inclusion. We just formed a working group at the Big East to really dial in on that very important topic and what we can do as a conference to support the work of our schools. So we'll have experts that will brief our group on that. So I see it as my job to keep it in front of them. Where we as a conference can be helpful, we try. So with the FBI scandal of last year, the NCAA, acting quickly, put together a commission chaired by former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. They wanted a blue ribbon commission, many of whom did not have ties to basketball, but were thought to be people of integrity that could put together basically a reform brief, which after several months of research and interviews and so on, they did. That was the so-called Rice report that came out a year ago with a whole list of recommendations. They're a very comprehensive report. It wasn't one thing that they saw a need to get at in terms of in some cases, corruptive college basketball recruiting environment. Our part of that is we gave a brief. We gave the commission, in advance of their report, a brief. We talked to our ADs on my staff at the Big East. Stu Jackson, who used to run basketball operations for the NBA, was in that job for 13 years, knows as much about basketball as anybody in the country, weighed in. We had our views about one and done. We recommended the NBA just let the kids go right out of high school. If they can earn a living playing basketball right out of high school, why should they have to not be able to do that for a year? Why should they have to go to Europe or the G League or come to a college if they don't want to be in school? Let them go right to the NBA, we said. So we had a whole list of recommendations on that score, and again, in an attempt to be helpful, because as a basketball conference, we felt like we had a grasp on this material, and we wanted to be in a leadership position. So where we can help, we will. The NCAA is always asking for input from the membership on issues ranging from esports, which they're trying to get their arms around right now. It's a growing activity on campus. NCAA doesn't regulate it. It's going to be a big business. To your point, everyone's sort of going, like, what do we do with this? We actually have a Big East esport competition now. Congratulations
We won.
to you.
Yeah, we
you
won
guys
the
won. They just won League of Legends, so he's a jack of all here with his management ability.
Not
So,
just
there's a
basketball
whole,
now.
I mean, I don't know, this is a broad question, Andrew. I mean, there's so many issues today that we're trying to stay on top of, trying to figure out where we fit in. In terms of sustainable, I don't know. I mean, the grand experiment of the Big East is that we can win national championships in basketball without football money. We're the grand experiment on that. We do not have anything close to the revenue streams that the Atlantic Coast Conference, Pac-12, Big 12, Big 10, and SEC have. I mean, and that's because of football. That's 75 or 80% of the revenue in college sports is coming from the sport of football. So we don't have that, but we have other things, and we've got, we think what we need to really keep it going in a very relevant and nationally competitive fashion. And that's important to our schools. They want it to be basketball schools, and so that's how we're going to do it there. Is it sustainable long term? I don't know the answer to that, because if a pay-for-play system comes into being, or the rules do change on NIL that require additional financial obligations to be made by the schools, or there's additional expenses associated with our cost structure, because the cost of business never goes down. Cost of business always goes up. I do think, as Mark noted, athletic departments will be really pinched. And if not for example, the, beneficence of donors who make a lot of good things happen because of their ability to fund capital projects, or the Finneran Pavilion, or new fields or whatever, a lot of what we do just doesn't happen. It's really not on the backs of the students, it's on the backs of the donors. And the reason they're doing it is because of, what they feel about their alma mater. They're rooting for the name on the front of the jersey. They often don't even care who the athletes are. They're rooting for Villanova. They're rooting for the alma mater there. And as an alum of Virginia, who watched, I said to everybody, if it couldn't be 10, there were 10 schools that I had, first, and if it couldn't be one of the 10, they were my 11th choice. But, they got it. So, but that's, and I've been gone many, many years, but that's a big pull still, a long time later. So that to me, those are open questions, I think. But, until those days happen and we have to figure out, we're just going to, kind of keep plugging along and doing what we're doing.
Just to follow up what Val said, for people who don't know, this rule that high school players can't go directly to the NBA, and as Val talked about recommending that rule, which is obviously not the case, you have to stay 1 year, it's not an NCAA rule. It's an NBA rule. So that is negotiated between the NBA and the NBA players, and we'll have the head of the NBA players up here in a little while. And just so people know, this is not something that college sports is dictating. It's pro sports. So I think people need to...
And it's union, by the way. The NBA needs the support of its union. It's a term of their collective bargaining agreement. So the two parties have to agree on that. And they're apparently in the midst of those negotiations now. Yes. As from the published reports, we understand that's now under examination.
I did want to follow up when you talked about Virginia, your number 11 or whatever it was. Just a side question, how do you make Mark Jackson feel like he's the most special AD in the conference, and every other AD feel the same way, and every other president? That is, I would think, a very challenging part of your job.
I love all my children. It's not really that hard, at least for me. I just love the Big East. I mean, I don't want to sound like a sap, but, I played basketball at a time when women's basketball was just getting off the ground. My dad was a basketball referee. I worked at the NBA for 16 years. I've worked for many basketball organizations. I just love this game. And, for me to be able to work in a conference where basketball is so the focus is sort of like a dream come true for me. The answer to your question is, and it gets back to points Mark and I made, the commonality of our conference makes it really easy, I think, to sort of deal with everybody in a particular fashion. The old Big East, it broke up because not only was it the football schools versus the basketball schools, and Vince Nicastro, who fortunately now works for us at the conference office, is our very able deputy commissioner and chief operating officer, knows all the stories of how the old league, broke up and how our league came to be. But the fact that our schools are so common now, we have 10 schools, we have 9 Catholic, they're different orders, right? So I had to learn the Augustinian versus the Dominican versus the Vincentian, orders, and 1 private, and that's Butler. But their values at Butler are very similar to the values at Villanova. So our board meetings are very collegial. Our presidents really, they're very united in many respects. And there's only 10, so it does make it easy for me. I get to every school every year. It's important to me to be on every campus. Our ADs are amazing. Many have been with us for the last 6 years. Mark, one of our newcomers, but has quickly fit in. Some of our ADs have been around for a really long time, among the most respected in our business. So it's a really easy group to if that makes sense. And they're so collaborative and we all work together so well that it really isn't hard to sort of, make everybody feel like they're part of things and important because they are.
Yeah, and I'll weigh in here because she's being very humble and modest. This woman's a trailblazer on a number of different fronts. Just a fantastic leader in our industry, male, female, doesn't matter. I've seen her in all different kinds of settings. I'm not just saying this because you're sitting here, a brilliant woman that I've seen at the highest levels of the NCAA, whether it's the soccer influence that you have on where we're headed as a country around soccer, to the Vatican. We're really fortunate to have Val's leadership, and there is a collegiality, I think, amongst our institutions based on that leadership and how she pulls us together. We're not always aligned, but having been a part of some other conferences, we need each other to survive. When you think about the major components of our Fox contract and our Big East Garden contract, and we've hit on some really big topics in the short time that I've been here, and I think because of your leadership, we're as strongly positioned as we've ever have been. So you do a wonderful job. Let's clap for Val.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
All right, Mark, they've clapped for Brian and Val. You and I are... Brian, you and I have talked about sort of the college sports model. What we're talking about is big-time college football and college basketball and way it feeds professional sports. Again, is that going to continue? Is that sustainable? Is there going to be some pay model in your mind that's next for these kind of big-time college sports?
Well, first of all, I want to, speak one thing about the NBA thing, and I think it's interesting because, like Mark mentioned, the NBA, I think Val actually mentioned it, the NBA is the reason why guys can't go straight from high school, and I think there's a reason for that. They want to see what these guys are just a little bit before they come into the league. They're making a big investment in some of these players, and so they want to at least get a year glimpse of the type of player that they are on the collegiate level, just to see what they're going to be as a pro. So I kind of understand that, but I also believe that there are a bunch of kids, LeBron and Kobe, and those are the greats, Kevin Garnett. There's a bunch of kids that will have the opportunity that's going to fail. Right. And then you wonder what's happening to those guys. And so there's some concern on both sides. But when you talk about pay for play, when you talk about these big-time schools getting these big-time TV contracts, which was huge. I mean, you talk about Nick Saban, and I don't know how much he makes, tens of millions of dollars. That's a lot when you're talking about kids that are on his team, the 90 kids that are on his team that are at times are struggling to eat, trying to find something to eat in the mess hall at the practice. That's a big disparity, and I think that there has to be some middle ground there. When you talk about, and I'll use Zion Williamson as an extreme example. He's on one end of the spectrum. There's a bunch of other players that are on the other end. But he's a guy that he'll sell hundreds of thousands of jerseys this year, right? And the school will make thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars on that. To me, that's on his back. And of course, and I know Val mentioned the name on the front, and Duke is a big-time name, and I think that name will continue to ring bells. But a lot of those people buying their jersey are supporting one person, Zion Williamson, not just the school. Right. And I think that there's a way that these guys should be compensated. And I don't know that it's going to be taken away from the school. and from my opinion, I don't know everything about the whole deal, but I know the schools are getting paid by the TV revenue share, right? And I think that if you're using these kids' likeness, that they should be supported by that. And if you're using Brian Westbrook's likeness to sell jerseys or footballs or whatever at the school store, Brian Westbrook should get a piece of that because it's me and it's what I represent and how I carry myself, and that's why you're able to sell those things. And I know it may mess up some things. It's not equal to everyone, but not everyone is out there doing the right thing. Not everyone's out there on the floor excelling. And, there's a bunch of smart people, way smarter than me, that are tasked at figuring this out. Val and Mark probably at the lead of this. As a player, all you're saying is, and there's other players, and I'll give you an example. What if Zion, for some crazy reason, wanted to stay in school? And one of the reasons was because, you know what, I'm going to get $60,000 from the sale of my jersey. I don't need it, and I know it doesn't compare to the NBA money, but I want to actually stay in school. I want to stay enjoy being a collegiate student one more time, and that $60,000 or whatever the amount is going to help me stay there. To me, that makes a difference. And there's just a bunch of college kids that are struggling. And the one thing that you don't want to see, the one thing I don't want to see, is guys making financial decisions to leave school, leave their education, leave their everyday life to go live an adult life just for a financial decision. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I think there's a way to kind of get around that. It's going to take a lot of smart people to figure that out. And I think it's going to be difficult.
So are you talking about mainly the marketing endorsement model? Or do you think there should be some kind of a compensation for top?
Well, I think there's certainly the marketing side of things. When you're talking about their likeness, absolutely, there should be a big chunk there. Unfortunately for that, there is only, and we're not talking about a bunch of people.
Right.
There's maybe 4, 5, 6, let's say 10 at the most, people in the NCAA basketball that will probably reap the rewards from that. Quite honestly, I mean, you can sit here and if you can name me 10 people in the tournament that you would want to go buy their jersey, I think a lot of people would struggle to do that, quite honestly. So there really would be 4 or 5 people that have that ability. So that wouldn't really affect everybody. But I do think, first of all, and this is kind of a misnomer, these guys are getting a lot. So they're getting a lot from the school. They're getting a great education. They're getting food. They're getting room and board. They're being able to travel. You look at the Villanova basketball team, probably like just any other big-time school, they're staying at the best hotels, eating the best food. They're being treated like royalty everywhere they go. This is a first-class place. Big East is a big first-class conference, so they're being treated well. These guys aren't staying in the Motel 6. But at the same time, these schools, these coaches are making a bunch of money on the backs of these players. And I think these players should be compensated a little bit more than just school, a little bit more than just the $250,000 or $300,000 it takes to be educated for 4 years. I think there's a way to do that. And I think it's up to, front runners in these sectors to be able to figure that out. In the old model, the same way Michael Rubin was talking about reform of a justice system model that was built years ago that doesn't fit anymore. Well, I think that's what the NCAA is tasked with, figuring out a model to make sure players are compensated the same way that coaches and ADs and commissioners are compensated. That not to say that you're not making $50,000, $60,000 a year, but $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 will make a difference to some of these young people and their families.
I mean, that's the question mark, because big-time college basketball, which we are, big-time college basketball, you see what's happening. AAU coaches, hangers-on, people paying, agents when they're 12 years old, all kinds of people stroking these kids. Obviously, you can sit and say, well, we don't recruit those kind of kids. But now AAU has taken over that level of play, and how do we, you, Jay, stay above the fray? I mean, obviously our values, but yes.
Yeah, and first I want to hit on Brian's point, because that was really well stated, and I couldn't agree with you more on the image and likeness piece to big-time college athletics. If there's a way we could develop some kind of trust where money is put aside so that when a kid graduates, he collects what he earned based on his name, image, and likeness, I couldn't agree with you more. I'd like to hear your take on the latest case study around the Alston case, and then what's the UCLA, the guy that played basketball at UCLA? What?
Ed O'Bannon.
O'Bannon, the O'Bannon case.
O'Bannon,
Yeah, I always
yeah.
forget O'Bannon, and where that stood. The bigger picture of pay for play, again, I'd like to hear your perspective, the implications of Title IX, and how do we stay equitable, in terms of distribution of funds, if it were ever to get to that. Now, not only would we have financial implications that we probably couldn't uphold, but then there's also, an equity standard that
It would be almost impossible based on just that, because unfortunately, I think there's a lot of great women's sports,
Right.
but they just don't make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, and it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, it's just the reality, but I do think there's real merit in the image and likeness from my perspective, and I would support that. To briefly hit on your point, I think, basketball, if anybody's had a chance to read Jay's book that came out a couple years ago called Attitude, I think lessons learned from the 2009 Final Four, where he came out of that, although it didn't go our way at the end, had the ability to have his pick of blue chip, 5-star, one and done type kids, and we took some chances. And if you saw his win total after 2009, it took a significant dip. He had to sort of rethink his philosophy on that about obviously doing your homework, doing your due diligence, not just recruiting the kid, recruiting the whole family, recruiting somebody here that is aligned with Villanova's mission. Jay understands that better than anybody in college athletics. I think he's such an ambassador for Villanova because he believes so much in it. It's part of who he is. His wife went to school here. So he recruited kids that were aligned with that, and I think we're now seeing the benefits. Puts a lot of thought into every decision to somebody that he brings to campus, and oftentimes he'll pass on a more talented kid that doesn't fit the mission. Do we always get it right? No. We'll look at this season. We had a big time transfer and Javon, and just wasn't a fit. Great kid, just didn't fit. What on either side. So sometimes you learn lessons that way.
Yeah, I'll let you start in a minute, Val, because I remember Jay telling me, not mentioning any names, but some coaches out there, he says they can't coach because they're just managing. They're managing the high school coaches of the kids, they're managing AAU coaches, they're managing the entourages. They're not really coaching. And I know he never wanted to get into that, but that can be reality for your top players. Right, Val? I mean, that level of player in basketball these days.
Sure. Well, I would just add to Brian's comments. Agree. Well said. I don't know how it works in football, Brian, but in basketball, it's just sort of interesting to me. This is why we supported the elimination of one and done. If you're a high school basketball player, you do have an opportunity to go pro right away. You can go to Europe. That's been going on forever. You can go there. You can be a pro, you can draw a salary. In some cases, in many countries, it's very favorable tax treatment. I don't know how that works with tax treaties, but you can get great deals, housing, get everything covered. You can be a professional right away. The NBA rules, even though they block a player from going directly to the NBA out of high school, they have always allowed a player to go directly to the G League right out of high school. So you can become a professional basketball player in the United States right out of high school. So you can decide to go there and become a pro. You can draw a salary, everything that goes with that. It's taxed, of course. The G League is working hard, it seems, to build that league. They have now come up with this category of contract called select contract. I think it's $125,000 a year that it goes into effect this year. So they are, in effect, saying the NBA is, we recognize there may be players out there who don't want to go to college, who don't want to go to Europe. We're happy to have them, and for the tippy-top best of those players, we're going to offer them this salary. I don't know where they came up with the number, but that's it. I'm also hearing that the G League, for the players who don't want to go to college, in addition to having a grossed-up salary structure, is also going to offer educational opportunities to the players. So you could go there, be a pro, draw the salary, everything that goes with pay for play, and get your education on the side. So that option, which to me is fantastic, because that covers a category of players. College basketball, at least it seems to me, has a different sales proposition here. At least has, of course, it's being tested. But that proposition has been, if you want to come here, here's what the quid pro quo is for you. Here's what the compensation is for you. You get a full scholarship. I mean, I had this costed out at your place, Mark, a couple years ago. It's probably what a men's basketball player gets here at Nova, all in. I mean, I'm not, the attributable value of the travel, but the tuition fees, room and board, academic advising, I don't know, you can cost out the medical
Massage
services.
therapy.
Right, I mean, it's not cash in the pocket, but now there is, right, because it's cost of attendance on top of the scholarship benefits. I don't know, $150,000, something like that.
At least.
Maybe more, it's not nothing. And, you're part of this, and you get to play in Madison Square Garden, and you're not in the G League gyms, et cetera. You're part of something really special. You're getting, and importantly, you're getting your education at a first-class university like this one. So, I don't know, I mean, I played basketball at Virginia. I was on a scholarship. I was happy to have it. The idea for me that women's basketball players would get a salary is, it's frankly, it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, just as an aside, I sat in a 4-hour meeting on Wednesday at ESPN with 60 stakeholders from women's basketball, okay, who are all very committed to growing the game. It had people from the WNBA, women's college basketball. We had people globally who attended. We had 20 people from ESPN there because they're a major stakeholder in the women's game. And one of the core issues of women's basketball is that the sport is operating at a big cost. The revenues aren't there like they are on the men's side. Programs, because of Title IX, are spending on women because it's a Title IX principle that the men are getting this so the women get that. But the fact is they're running at large deficits in many universities. So some of the litigation, I think women's basketball has been included in that, and that's perplexing to somebody like me. I don't know why that, but there is a Title IX issue. So that adds to the complexity, of this sort of landscape that we're in here. But all I'm submitting, Brian, I think there's enough pressure on the system now, and the commercial outcomes in some cases are very visibly significant, very visibly meaningful. So I'm kind of agree with you that we're working towards something here, some system, and I think the concerns of the players in those cases have to be heard and dealt with in some fashion. But to be very clear here, that's not most of college sports.
Right.
College sports, remember I said we got 800 schools in D2 and D3. Mark's got a lot of schools on his program which are not bringing in this kind of revenue. He's got one team that's basically funding everything else, and if there's pressure on that team in terms of additional costs of doing business, then that's going to pressure other programs, and maybe the donors will come up with the money, and maybe there's another way to skin those cats. But these are very uncertain. These are questions that right now that don't have answers. So it makes it very hard to predict. There's no crystal balling here that I think any of us could do with precision for you on that.
One of the big issues I would think that schools and conferences would have with pay for play is that the better schools, the teams that win, that get more money,
An arms race.
Yeah, it'd be almost like a baseball type of deal. Like you have more money, so you get the best players, and the smaller schools get none of the good players, or they have to find a different way to develop talent, and it'll just be almost hard and impossible for schools like Villanova to compete against North Carolina and the bigger schools that Kentucky that win almost every year, or at least have a vision to win every year. It would just be tough. And so certainly there is complications in a difficult manner about it, but I think the NCAA continues to find revenue, and it doesn't go down. I think the TV revenue continues to go up. One of the things you guys continue to fight for, and eventually, I think you'll figure it all out. So I have a lot of confidence in that.
I remember you tell me, Brian, at the Eagles, you'd have players walking in from big-time colleges looking around and say, dude, my college has much better facilities than the Eagles. Jeez, what is this?
We make the joke that some of the first rounders that went to Florida State and Ohio State, that they took a pay cut to come to the NFL.
Yeah, we'll talk to Jeff Kessler about that next.
I see you, Coach Mark Ferrante, the football coach, in the back. I laugh because a lot of the guys that I played with, they were getting compensated just a bit in college. And they were like, well, how much did you get paid? You were the man at Villanova. How much did you get paid? I was like, well, I got paid in homework assignments and essays and nonsense. No, there was no dollars exchanged, I'll tell you that. It would have been nice.
Well, time flew. Let's thank our panel, Mark Jackson, Val Ackerman, Brian Westbrook. Thank you.